Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Moulthrop, Chief Executive here and also a proud member. And it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's forum, a look at one of our city's most important and in some ways most symbolic neighborhoods, Hough. Our program today is called A Short Look to the Past, A Long Look to the Future. And though we won't dwell on the past, it may be useful to start there. We chose this date because it is close to the date some 50 years ago when a panel of African-American leaders addressed the City Club to discuss the unrest that had just besieged the Hough neighborhood. Lou Stokes was among that group on September 16, 1966. He wasn't yet a congressman, just a very well-respected civil rights lawyer, often working on behalf of the Cleveland chapter of the NAACP. And he wasn't the only speaker that September day. He was one of four on the panel that had been billed as, quote, "The Negro Looks at Cleveland." The others were Baxter Hill of the Congress on Racial Equality, John Appling, a professional boxer and also the head of the Hough Young Adults Advisory Council, and Gerald Anderson, a member of the Urban League. These men were there to respond to the grand jury investigation and report into the causes of that summer's notorious race riots in the Hough neighborhood. Now, I have a lot to say about that forum, but I'll save most of it and encourage you to find it in the archives on our website. It is well worth listening to. The grand jury had just pinned blame for the riots on the Communist Party of Ohio and the local criminal element. You're allowed to laugh, yes. Stokes and the others on the panel, most notably Baxter Hill, who, as I said, led the Congress on Racial Equality, had another point of view to present. And in the form of Stokes and Hill, the, quote, Negro looked at Cleveland and Cleveland's power structure and eviscerated them. Today, we refer to those events as an uprising rather than a riot. And as Stokes reminded us on that day, it was, quote, a protest by people who had reached the depths of despair. The basic promise of city leaders in the wake of those events was that Hough would be rebuilt and injustices made right. Some recent coverage from both IdeaStream and The Plain Dealer has examined how much progress has been made in those 50 years, where we are now, and more importantly, perhaps, where we are headed. And today, in partnership with Cleveland State University's Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs and with the help of Rick Jackson from IdeaStream, who's serving as our moderator, we offer our own City Club contribution to this important ongoing conversation. So Rick, I hand it to you to introduce our panel and get us started. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Appreciate it. And thank you for all of your interest in this topic as well as we have this conversation with past and current leaders from Hough about Hough. We will briefly explore not just the neighborhood's rich and turbulent history, but more importantly, turn our eyes to the neighborhood's growth and its aspirations. This afternoon's panelists include Freddie L. Collier, Jr., Director of the City of Cleveland's Planning Commission, Carolyn Watts Allen, the former Public Safety Director for Cleveland and a Hough resident, and Barry Withers, Assistant Public Safety Director for the City of Cleveland and also a Hough resident. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for being here. So let's think about Hough. It is surprising to some of us there's an entire generation, not just these students here, but an entire generation of people outside the community who don't think uprising first when they hear the name. Dan outlined for us what happened in the years after the affluent had left and the private schools had gone east. The situation was exacerbated by absentee landlords, unemployment, and yes, declining city services. Selective choices by City Hall. I'd like to start the conversation, though, by having Freddie Collier explain the context of how Hough fits into Cleveland as a whole some 50 years after the uprising.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity for being here and speaking to all of you. That question is one that's extremely relevant. Hough is one of 34 neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland. One of the things that's interesting about Hough, in comparison to other neighborhoods, Hough is a neighborhood that flanks significant investment. And one of the things that we see in the city of Cleveland when we talk about the downtowns, the university circles, the investment in the Euclid corridor, the investment in the Opportunity corridor, and other key assets, we see areas like Hough as a fringe neighborhood. And when I say a fringe neighborhood, we're talking about a neighborhood that's right next to significant investment, but at the same time is suffering some significant challenges. What's interesting about Hough, though, is Hough has some really great assets and really great opportunities. The challenge that we're facing right now, though, is that many of those opportunities are being sought by individuals who may not currently live in the Hough community. There's been this dichotomy between neighborhoods that are affluent and neighborhoods that are challenged. And the fact that they abut each other, like University Circle and like a neighborhood of Hough, there's a fear that exists with many residents who have lived in a Hough neighborhood for some time. And there's interest by the establishment and institutions to leverage opportunities in that community. One of the challenges that we have to deal with in the city of Cleveland is really how can you bridge the gap and do it in a way where you do not sacrifice those who have lived in Huff for many years when Huff was not experiencing investment and growth. So this issue of equity, when we talk about disadvantaged or inherently disadvantaged neighborhoods, how do we begin to invest in a way that actually creates opportunity for the residents who live there to thrive? This growth that's going on in Cleveland, we often, talk about how well we're doing, and we often put up University Circle in the downtowns, and that's great. But the flip side of that coin is really how do we create opportunities for those communities that flank those investment areas? And the city of Cleveland, its partners, many of them are here today, are really trying to determine what is the path forward. And we know that it's not just about throwing money at it. That doesn't work. We are looking at policy and other tools that actually transact equity. So equity is just not some idea that people talk about when they want to seem like they're down. It's one of those things that we have to make sure that equity is embedded in our decision making. Equity is embedded in our investments. So we have to really be transactional about this issue of equity, particularly when we're talking about communities like Huff.
That is our foundation. We will build from there. There are a lot of numerous and varied dynamics that Freddie touched on that play into Huff 2016. We'll go through some of those, beginning with perhaps one of the most visible, which is housing. And many of you probably drive through but not to Huff. You don't know what's going on inside Huff. These folks live there. You've lived there 22 years, I believe, Carolyn. Give us a look at how Huff has changed in those past 2 decades. And let's start with that idea of housing.
Okay, thank you, Rick. I am not a person that grew up in Huff per se. And there are many people who still live in Huff that have been there even for generations. And though they're not here to speak for themselves, they were there in the midst of when the Huff riots occurred. But one of the things the reason that I am in Huff, the reason Barry is in Huff, that we moved to Huff was to reinvest in the community. See, after those riots, people determined that, first of all, because of the riots, there was something wrong with this community. We made national news. And people began to think, you don't want to go to Huff. And I'm not just talking about white residents, I'm talking about black residents. Stay away from Huff. But Huff is strategically located, and there's a lot of beauty in the people that lived in Huff. And when I went to work for Mayor White in 1990, he had a strong program of reinvestment in the communities, in the urban communities of Cleveland, a powerful program of reinvestment. And we had a council person, as most of you know, Fannie Lewis was our council person, and she was an advocate for reinvestment in the Huff community. And we had a community development corporation. Huff Area Partners in Progress was a community development corporation there. Vicki Johnson was the director of that development corporation. And as a Clevelander, as a native Clevelander, I lived and grew up next door to Huff. I grew up in Glenville. Later on, after the Huff riots, there were the Glenville riots as well. When I lived in Glenville, when the Huff riots broke out, I was working downtown. And I would go downtown, and we were occupied by the National Guard at the time. During the Huff riots, they called out the National Guard. And people who were living in Huff and in the immediate vicinity, National Guard would walk us down the streets to make sure that we weren't troublemakers. So, fast forward, after the Huff riots, Huff became a negative attitude. There was a negative thinking about Huff. But Fannie Lewis being an advocate, putting together the Development Corporation, and Mayor White instituting policies to bring communities back, interested me when I was appointed by him to be the safety director for the city. And it more than just interested me because my husband and I had talked often about reinvesting in our communities. We were living in the Forest Hill section of Cleveland Heights at the time, and I'm sure many of you are familiar with that community. It used to be a community that for many years didn't even permit African Americans and Jewish people to live in it. They have a history that goes back, back many decades of that. But we had the opportunity, saw the opportunity. I had finished law school, gone to Columbus, got married, came back. My husband and I were living in Cleveland Heights. But we talked all the time. We need to build our communities back. We need to build our own communities back. Look at what's going on in Cleveland. Look at how they've abandoned communities like Huff and other communities. Why don't we, as people, come together and invest in our communities? And so when Mayor White called me and asked me to be the safety director, my husband said, this was his dream. He said, over there, raise your hand, Robert. he said, let's move back into the community. So we started looking for houses because part of the policy at the time, which was, I think, passed by City Council of Cleveland, was that you had to live in the city of Cleveland if you were going to work in the city of Cleveland. Now everybody talks about that's not fair, that's unconstitutional, and the courts have tried to overturn that. But that's had a negative impact because now we have people who, God bless their hearts, they live in the suburbs, but they want to work in Cleveland. Well, again, part of the reason our communities are disinvested is because city employees no longer have to live in the city. That is an element of disinvestment. So at that time, because we had to move back in, we began to look around. And we looked around for neighborhoods that we wanted to live in. Well, lo and behold, we found the kind of housing structure that we had enjoyed in the Forest Hill section. We were pleased to live in one of the Rockefeller homes. Beautiful. And I thought, I'm going to have to give up my home. But you know what? We found that the housing stock that existed in Huff was very similar. And I thought, wow, maybe we can do this. Robert said, let's move to Huff. We couldn't find the right house anywhere else. And I said, well, I don't know about moving to Huff now. Let's go over in this neighborhood. Because there was this mindset, you see, and I was there. 20 years ago. Right, and this was 22 years ago. And I'm thinking that mindset is not good because, again, this whole idea of communist and criminal element and all of that was stirred up in my mind as well. And so I hesitated. But it turned out that he said, let's call some of our friends and let's all do it together. I said, you think you can find 2 people that want to move back with us? I don't think so. Well, I was wrong. We called friends. I was the safety director and Barry was the assistant safety director. So I called up Barry. I said, Barry, wouldn't you like to move to Huff? And he went, at first, I don't know how he did. I'll let you tell your own story, but what Diane said when you went home, okay? So I then called up neighbors, friends that we knew from other areas, called up our church family, and we said, listen, we're going to be building a community. We decided to build a community in Huff because we felt by moving. You see, one of the things that happened is the economic disinvestment resulted in leaving a lot of poor people behind. Because when the riots were over, people that could move, moved. And that's the way, what hurts communities. When people who have the resources to spend money in their community decide to up and leave and they do it in mass, then you have economic disinvestment. Businesses follow right behind them. And so then we have what we have left. And we have people who then are poor. And that is what had happened was the cause of the riots, which was not the communists. It was all of the people that moved out during the heyday of blockbusting. Okay, let's get real how that happened. The heyday of blockbusting, those who moved out of the communities took their money with them, rented their houses, and left them alone, and left the poor people there with no resources and no opportunities. That's what disinvests communities. So our purpose was to move en masse and reinvest in our communities. And so we put our group together. We came up initially with 60 people, 60 families who wanted to move in. And then we began to have meetings. That started in 1990. We had meetings. People dropped out. People thought they wanted to do it idealistically, but when the rubber met the road and you had to move yourself and your family, it was a whole nother thing. So a lot of people dropped out. But we ended up with 20 families, and we decided to build 20 homes. And that's what we did. And the first argument we had was that people wanted to start off with small homes that were, 1,100 square feet, something of that nature. And we didn't have that in mind. We went out to Westlake and looked at houses. And we said, we're going to put them right here in Huff. And it was like, oh, these people have really lost it. They lost it. And here was the thing. The banks wouldn't do it because there were no comparable sales in the area to make it happen. So most of the banks that we approached said no. But I want to give a shout out to Third Federal, because even though we knew the houses we were going to build were ranging at that time, between $160 up to almost $300,000, and we were going to do something that had never been done before. It was driven by the market, by the buyers, not by a developer. And Vicki and Rob Curry, he did the work. He did the real hard work, all the money work. He did that and helped us with the developer. We found the developer that would do it. But Third Federal said, we will go with this. We'll finance this. We know there are no comparables. And so we will not try to, that was the other thing, we will not try to sell your mortgages to make a profit. We're going to hold them, and we're going to support you. So we came together with a lot of partners. The political area, Mayor White, Fannie Lewis, the Community Development Corporation, people who knew about housing development like Rob Curry, and Third Federal. And as we came together as a group with partners, we were able to attain that dream of making an impact in at least the one area of Huff and build 20 homes. So that's how it started for us 22 years ago. So we moved in 22 years ago to our home.
Let me stop you there for a second. Good explanation. How many of you knew there were $300,000 houses in Huff? Okay, good. Educated crowd. She touched on a lot of points I wanted to get back to. Freddie, she used the word abandon, that the city abandoned Huff and some certain other neighborhoods. How are we getting away from that now? What's the city doing to underscore the impetus of what could happen there and in some other areas?
One thing I want to emphasize is it's not just the city. There's a tendency to point back to local government as the judge of what goes down at every turn, and that's not the case. What was outlined also was a result of federal and state policy decisions and being able to leverage state and federal opportunities. For example, in the city of Cleveland has one of the oldest land banks in the country. Right. That's how you were able to assemble land to actually build the $300,000 houses that was referenced. But what the city is doing now on our end is we're really focusing on targeted neighborhoods, target zones. I alluded to earlier our focus on the fringes. Cleveland is going to grow again, but it's going to be a regenerative approach. So when we talk about University Circle, when we talk about the Glenvilles, the Huff, the Fairfaxes, those areas are where we're investing our resources. And I want to clear up something because it's very important to understand. The notion that the city invests in these growth areas and forgets about the neighborhood is a myth. Most of the city's resources goes to neighborhood services to support the surrounding communities. Downtown, University Circle, many of these areas are corporately, privately, and philanthropically driven with facilitation by the city. So a lot of our efforts are going into those areas. As it relates to abandonment specifically, as a result of riots and other things and the residue that was left as the exodus of people and industry left the city, our strategy has been targeted demolition, restoration of vacant land, some of that being allowed to be dispensed through our land bank, but also new housing investment. There's a project that many of you may be familiar with known as Upper Chester. How many of you are familiar with the Upper Chester project? One example in Huff of how the penetration in the Huff will start at the fringes and continue to move into Huff. Now, when I say penetration, I don't mean that in a negative way. When I say penetration, that means that in the Huff community, for example, where you have $300,000 clusters of homes, you also have the other extreme. And we realized through a 2-year initiative that although Huff is 96% black, okay, very monolithic community, you still have the haves and have-nots living right next door. So how do you address that dynamic? And how do you create a Huff where people, as they grow in economic status, they can actually live in a unit or a home that is decent, affordable, nice, with good quality of life? And just to stay on the housing track for a moment, you don't change a neighborhood just by housing. You have people who've invested in housing product in Glenville but can't walk to a coffee shop. That's not sustainable. Eventually, they're going to say, maybe we need to rethink this.
Economics demands
Absolutely.
business.
So what you're talking about and what the young woman and her friends did, and Barry and those guys, they had a collective consciousness, which is another thing that's missing in our communities nowadays. They had a collective conscious when they came and they invested in that particular geography, and it was a concerted effort, so you got this visual transformation. But the amenities that accompany individuals like yourself has still yet to be provided. So part of what the effort is how do you respond to that market dynamic? Now let me confuse things a little bit more. If you were to take the population dynamics that are occurring right now, where you have young people who want to live in the urban core now, who do not want to commute 100 miles to get back and forth to work, who want to ride their bike, who are looking to invest in the urban core, are looking to those very neighborhoods right now as we speak. You go to a community meeting in Huff and some of these other neighborhoods where everyone looked like me at one point. Now you're seeing people who don't live in a neighborhood actually weighing in on community decisions. That's an interesting dynamic. So these are things that we have to prepare for because these communities are going to evolve. It's just a matter of trying to determine how they evolve and who benefits from it.
Almost don't want to throw the G word out there, gentrification, but it will come up, and Mansfield will jump up and start yelling at me if I don't. I wanted to get to you, Barry, because we talk about these things, the growth, but also we talk about the neighbors. You've got Case, you've got the clinic. We saw this summer the museum and the orchestra coming into Huff. This is the right time to make all of these things we're talking about here come together: economics, politics, housing, business.
Thank everybody for the opportunity to be here. I just want to make one statement before we go to that. Huff is a neighborhood of families. There are families, there are kids who grew up in Huff. My grandkids come over. My nephew who I raised went to Cleveland Public Schools. My wife, who was one of the individuals who was very instrumental in us making that decision to move here, was a public school teacher. And she fought mightily for the preservation of public schools and communities, et cetera. So we moved to Huff. We moved to Huff not just because it was an opportunity to buy a home. It was an opportunity to be in a community not unsimilar to the one that we grew up in. I grew up in North Carolina, in the South, in a very segregated South. My wife grew up in a very poor neighborhood, and we wanted the opportunity for other folks to see folks who worked every day, folks who raised their kids, folks who had a family, that we were just like everybody else. And when I had the opportunity to work with Carolyn and Mayor White, who was fiercely focused on housing, and I'm blessed to be able to work with a mayor now that's fiercely focused on community development in areas, we love this opportunity. One of the things that I think that disappoints me sometimes is that we have a theories of what is successful. And it keeps us from trying something new and different. Why is it that we have to have certain types of development to have certain things happen? I would love to be able to one of the things I love about Huff is that I can get anywhere I want to in about 5 minutes. When the weather's bad downtown, man, all my coworkers, man, I gotta get on the highway to get home. I'm home in 10 minutes. You know, there are days when I get really, really frustrated. I go home and have a cup of coffee at lunch and come back. I can't do that anywhere else in town. You can't do it anywhere else in town. So I love the neighborhood from that perspective. But what I'm hoping that this conversation generates is a new look and a new thought about how to develop neighborhoods and community. I love Huff. I love the vibe of the people. I love the fact that my grandkids, who some of which live out of state, some live in other suburbs, can walk the streets and understand what it is to be in a Huff, understand the rich cultures of it. I'm thrilled about League Park. I'm a baseball fan, and Huff is like baseball. What Yogi Berra said, it ain't over till it's over. Well, Huff ain't over. Huff is beginning to. We're in the top of the eighth, and we're going around the bend. We got the top of our order coming up. We're going to move forward, and I'm hoping that through Freddie's leadership and folks who have some ability to push reinvestment will look at Huff differently. It doesn't look at when my wife and I decided to move to Huff, I didn't care whether or not we were going to get our investment back. Right. I did, and that was not even an issue. What I wanted to do, my investment was investment in people who came from the same things that I came from. An investment in opportunity for kids who play with my nephews and my son and my grandkids to see that there's great opportunity in this country. And it was an opportunity for me to kind of deal with some of those issues that since I'm maybe the oldest one in the room, that during the 60s and when I was in Vietnam, coming back from the war, trying to figure out what's going on with this country, that Huff allowed this opportunity, had me the opportunity to do something different than I ever thought I'd ever have the opportunity to do.
Excellent.
Thank you.
There are so many topics that we would love to touch on. I see the time is almost time for us to give it to you. We want to talk about land aggregation. We want to talk about safety. You touched on League Park. There's so many other subjects. I know that some of you are going to bring those up, so we will get to that just in a minute here. Today we are enjoying a look at the past, present, and future of Huff, featuring Freddie L. Collier Jr., Director of the City of Cleveland Planning Commission, Carolyn Watts Allen, the former Public Safety Director at the City of Cleveland and a Huff resident, and Barry Withers, the Assistant Public Safety Director at the City of Cleveland, also a Huff resident. We are about to begin the audience Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, or those of you joining us via our webcast. If you'd like to tweet a question, please go ahead and tweet it, and I need to find the address for that, at the City Club. At the City Club, and our staff will try to work it into the program. We do want to remind you that your questions should be brief and to the point, and actually questions. Holding the microphones today, Content Coordinator Teddy Eisenberg and Director of Programming Stephanie Jansky. May we have the first question, please? Teddy is running over there.
My name is Bob Zimmer. I am the founder of the Baseball Heritage Museum. We're very happy to be in the Huff neighborhood. I had to write this down because I want to make sure I get it right. What role do you think the city's $6.3 million anchor investment, League Park, could and should play as a catalyst for redevelopment of the neighborhood?
Told you it would come up. Who would like to jump on that? Barry?
I would, you know what, Bob, when I drive down Lexington and I see all the people coming over to see League Park and see the place where Babe Ruth hit his 500th home run and all those things like that, I think about all the opportunities for restaurants, for coffee shops, for tournaments. It's a wonderful field there. So I think that it could be an anchor. And I think that it could be an anchor, but what we have to do is get other folks to believe that it can be an anchor. And because I believe it, I think that Freddie believes it can be, and I'm sure that my neighbors do. So and I know Mansfield, who and come around from there, look at Mansfield's. He give you a glass of wine. I mean, but I think it's an excellent opportunity for it.
Back in 2014, when League Park opened, 2,000 people came to that opening. That had to be the biggest crowd we'd seen in Huff or something like that in decades. And really, it is what the city is looking for all along.
Absolutely, but I think too, the programming of League Park, it's one thing that the asset is there, you know, but it's really how do you program it to keep people engaged in it.
More than baseball.
Yeah, you know, programming it in a way, you know, where people start to recreate around it on a consistent basis. And to what Barry alluded to that I think is really important is leveraging the asset. And that is where when you talk about the spin-off amenities that could occur as a result of the investment, the retail, the other types of activities, that's really important because if you're going to have people coming into Huff, you want to have them spending in Huff too. You know, and I think if you can leverage that asset in a way, namely 66th Street, which is a north-south sort of thoroughfare that actually links you to Euclid Corridor, you know, and part of the approach that we're taking is how do we begin to sort of link all of these various assets to one another to leverage the investments because League Park in isolation, doesn't do everything that it can do. You have to build off of that, and that's really I think the work of the city and ultimately the community has to be a driver of that. But the dynamic, again, and I always allude to the dichotomy, you have individuals who may not see that opportunity, may not believe it's possible, or may be just disinterested in going that route. And that's where I believe the Huff community has to rally together and converse together, which really leads to the issue of leadership in the Huff community and how conversations happen in the Huff community is really going to be important.
Thank you. Stephanie.
Do you think that if more immigrants and refugees moved in there, they would bring a type of intensity with them that could help reinvigorate the Huff?
If more
Immigrants and
Immigrants.
refugees.
Well, I don't know. I hadn't thought about that. But I tell you what, I think that as people take up residency and have resources available to bring them together and have common ground on which they can invest themselves in their communities, then the whole community can rise. I like what the director said here. You got to get people excited. Really, when we developed our housing, we were flat out excited about this, making this effort and doing something new. I'm sure when Mansfield he moved in and he started his vineyard, we were like, whoa, look at that. You see, it's the contribution that people make. So if they, the people who have lived there for years or the people who are relatively new, it's the contribution you make. The League Park, again, that's an investment. And the potential for League Park shows that there are people that are excited about this neighborhood. So I think it is like anything else. And, my mom used to be a salesperson, and she told me this: whatever you're doing, promote, and promote some more. And if you're not promoting, then it's not happening. And so we need partners. We have to partner with banks that have vision, okay? Because we've had a tough time with banking and economic investment. The people with the money are afraid because they can't see the future. They're looking at the bottom line today. And all the indicators say, don't spend your money over there. Let's spend it somewhere else, safer, where we're not thinking about a vision, we're thinking about a return. And as Barry said, we didn't even think about a return. We knew when we went in and got our loans, we knew that there was no potential resale at that time because it hadn't happened. So now there have been, but we had 2008, so a couple of people have sold, and they didn't sell for what they paid for it. But that happened to everybody. It happened to everybody. So what do we have to do? We have to come together as partners, individuals who move in, individuals who are there, and others who want to invest their time and talents, and we have to work together, and we have to be like we are. We're Believe Land, right? So you got to believe. Now, if you don't believe, don't come to the table. That's all.
I think that Huff is a welcoming place for anybody who wants to live there. And I think there's been some history. I know with the Catholic Charity, the Catholic Church, a few years ago had some young men from one of the African countries that were Sudan that were living there. Some mornings I'm up early. You know, it's one thing about when you get older, you wake up so early. Nobody ever told me about that. But some mornings I'm up and I see, you know, all sorts of people jogging. And some of them don't look like me. I said, boy, there's a whole lot of folks that come through, feel comfortable to come through this neighborhood. So I think that any opportunity to bring other folks into a community will make that community better. I think communities that are robust and diverse offer something very unique and wonderful.
Thank you for your question. Let's go over here.
Thank you for putting on these various community forums that I've been to. I worked for the city of Cleveland for 35 years in the engineering department. The real redevelopment of Huff started with Lexington Village, which Fannie Lewis was a huge, and HAP was huge partners, and then also the original Church Square, which due to the economy was cut down from the original area, which was the Church Square and the housing, to just the housing due to the economic crash. And I thank you for helping out. And what would you advise people that want to move into Huff and put the land together, which is very hard? What would you recommend that they do?
That's an open-ended question, but I'll give it a shot.
And while you're thinking on that one also, we have so many pieces and parcels of land in Huff. Do we need to aggregate it to make it more appealing to developers?
Yes.
Answer his first, and then you get to me.
Yes. So to the gentleman's question, I would say when you think about Huff, we have to create full life cycle communities. That means that you're able to mature in your community. So that means when you graduate from college, if you're a college student, you should be able to rent an apartment. And I like the fact that you alluded to Lexington Village. Lexington Village was one of the first, at least as long as I've been living, first rental products in a neighborhood that was really nice. Most college kids who were graduated from school had to get apartments in the inner ring suburbs or either downtown to have a real rental option that wasn't dilapidated for the most part. And Lexington Village introduced really that opportunity as a rental product. So this notion of having quality rental housing, condos, nice single family housing, as well as quality senior housing in one community needs to happen in Huff if you're going to create a situation where people can grow and be there for many, many years. And I think that's starting to happen. You're starting to see those options. You know, with the Upper Chester development, there's going to be a new senior component to that investment. You already have the single family homes that have been established pretty robustly. Lexington Village was sort of an anchor. And I think that diversity of product is really what's going to attract people. But I will say that we can't forget this aspect. One of the things that's going to make Cleveland attractive and has been making Cleveland attractive is value. People are not looking to break the bank. Even those with means are not looking to break themselves on a house. So people want to get into a situation where they can have the amenities, have a good home, but have it affordably so they can do other things. You know, you have a lot of people who house poor. You know, they got big cribs, but they ain't eating. You know what I'm saying? So that's a problem.
They're laughing
You know,
because they know.
no, that's true.
Yeah,
You know, and I think one of the things that we want to create in the city of Cleveland is we want to create communities where people have good amenities, but also have opportunity to enjoy lifestyle.
Well, that's very important, what he just said. So there's this big gap right now. And I just want to bring this to your attention so you can deal with it and we can work together on this. There's this big gap, and there is the gap where you have a lot of people that have had the vision for living in Huff, that have moved back, that have economic resources. Then you have a lot of people who don't have the same level of economic resources. And there is this gap of people who are recent college graduates, our kids that have gone on to school, other people's kids who we're now trying to raise up and say, get committed to the community. And they're not making enough to afford high-end homes, but they're making more than what is available at the, at the low level. And so they're moving to Cleveland Heights, and they're moving to South Euclid. And that's fine, but if you're trying to grow a community, you've got to fill in that gap with the housing that is suitable. That's what we had hoped would happen. And so we don't need, as you mentioned before, the poor living next to the middle class, the hanging on middle class. We need those that are growing in this economic strata, and that is missing. Upper Chester is fine. There's some controversy about Upper Chester. You can come and talk to the residents if you like. But there is some controversy because the rents are higher. I mean, you're going to pay $1,500 to live in a two-family, and the reality is you just graduated from school and you're living on a social worker's salary, and or you working at Cleveland Clinic and you got a nice job, but you can't pay $1,500. You want something in the $700 range, $750. Other than Lexington Village, which is full for the most part, it's not there. So we need to work together to fill that gap so that we can have economics across the whole range.
But before you jump in there was a lot of head turning going on at that table back there. I know you don't have a microphone. Is that what happened to you? You wound up in the Heights or in Euclid because you couldn't get to Cleveland?
Those are my two daughters.
Oh, okay. She was talking about them. Gotcha. Go ahead, Freddie.
So if I can actually respond to that, because I'm sure we may be of similar ages, who knows? But if I can respond to that, this gap that needs to be filled, and this is an out-the-box idea that we're kind of working on.
That's why we're here.
Yeah. So to kind of fill that gap, with students, for example, right? There's a lot of students at Case and a lot of our institutions. And for those of you who have gone to college and experienced college, you know that when you're a student, you're poor for the most part, right? And when you're a grad student, that's right, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things that we've been kicking around was, potentially working with our housing authority, who provides affordable housing product, but doing it in some of these hot markets at a small scale. The idea would be to produce a housing product that visually could blend into a community, but market those units through a CMHA to undergraduate and graduate students. And it's a good way of diversifying and bringing in a new mindset to the neighborhood and to the community, because a lot of the students at these universities are much more progressive. They don't have the racial and other hangups that their grandparents or whomever may have had. So it could actually change the culture by doing a strategy that introduces affordable housing product to undergraduate and graduate college students to live in the greater university circle ring. So that's something that we've been thinking about. This is not tested, but this is a sort of an out-of-the-box way of really trying to fill that gap that you just alluded to.
Well, I think that's an approach, but the devil's in the details, so you got to have the community talking about it and look at what the market really looks like, because you don't want just a student housing. You want something that's going to last as people grow in their career fields and their income goes up. So you don't want them just hopping in as renters and hopping out. We're talking about people we want to drive into the community to live there and stay there.
Housing choice.
Yeah.
I really want, I mean, what's missing in this discussion, for the most part, is a lot of folks who are residents. You know, we talk about solutions to a problem that other folks have to live with, and we don't invite the folks who are active parts of the community to be a part of the solution. And so I think that whatever plan that we develop is going to require a process for getting more involvement from folks who live there, who are not the ones who normally are involved in the discussion. We have to get young people involved in it. We have to get residents, long-term residents who may have been somewhat offended by folks moving into the community. And so there has to be a process to get those folks involved, and it has to be done in a manner that's not political. And it has to be done in a manner that, and the process has to be one that's not a political process, that folks don't feel they have to be associated with this political group, that candidate, et cetera, to be able to have say so. So we have to try to figure out a way to do that and involve the wide range of people that live there. Because we always try to find a solution to fix something folks, and we don't include them in the fixing. Right. We always get them, this is how you should, this will make you better, but we have to ask you what will make you feel better.
Right, so along that lines, I'm giving a shout out to Brother Bob and Fatima and LeJean Ray, because they are the core. They are really the core of service in our community. Not that the city doesn't do what they are supposed to do, but they serve every strata of economic person in our community. Seniors, small children, just everyone. And I think that is the place where we can have conversation. And Brother Bob, Fatima, they're always open for us. This is where we come. You know, we may go to, we happen to sit on the advisory board, but we go and we hang out with everybody. And so let's make it, you know, have the city come, we partner, together we communicate in the community. This is wonderful communication, but to make change, you got to communicate in the community with the people.
Thank you. Next question.
So my question, I noticed that you talked about equity and not equality. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so just to clarify equity, and I'm sure many of you already know this, equity and equality are two different things. And when we talk about this issue of equity, we're talking about inherent disadvantage. How do we focus our resources on those who don't have an opportunity to see the game? And a lot of people associate that with taking resources and investing them in this place over this one, when in actuality,
They both need it.
no. What we're saying is that the investments that need to happen are in those communities that's been played all along. And we don't need to focus very limited resources in areas that are already taken off. See, equality will call for you to look at and say, hey, we got 17 council wards. We got X amount of dollars and we need to spread it evenly. Yeah. No, we don't. We need to invest in areas that are at a disadvantage. Just like if you work out, right, and you got a strong upper body, you're gonna spend more time, and your legs are weak, you're gonna spend more time on a leg press than you are on a bench press because your upper body is strong, because you want balance. So that focus on your lower body is trying to create an equitable scenario for your body. And from a City of Cleveland perspective, there's communities that are at a disadvantage that we need to focus more attention on. That doesn't mean that we're forgetting about our upper body. We may hit it 2 times a week, but we're gonna be really working out our legs. That's the ideology behind what we talk about when we say equity. It's about really focusing our resources and efforts in those disadvantaged places so that we can create a more balanced city.
That's
Hope that answered your question. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Daya, and I attend Citizens Leadership Academy. My question is, what is your vision for Huff in 20 years?
Good.
20
Good
years.
question. Good
Let's start with Carolyn.
But, oh, me? Okay, wow. Wow. Let's see, 20 years from now, I really, now I just retired 2 years ago, so I hope I'm here 20 years from now. But I would say it would be a place where you have diversity of income, diversity of culture, and access to all the amenities that all of that diversity needs. That's ideal, is it not? So a diversity of income, diversity of culture, and a unity of commitment to the area. And we haven't made that happen, that level of diversity yet, but that's what I would like to see. And let me say one other thing to the young people. I would envision that never again in anybody's head, because I've done one of these seminars before at a school that you all invited me to. I hope never again in anybody's head will a young person say, Huff, I wouldn't go down there. Because believe it or not, they still say it. And it comes from young people. I mean, it's old people too, but I'm saying going into a school where there was no knowledge of Huff and what's gone on, the students were saying, when the question was asked, what do you think about Huff? And 2 or 3 of the students said, I wouldn't go down there. And I thought, wow, we have not yet changed perception. So that would be the final thing, to change perception.
Thank you. Barrett, you want to jump in there? 20 years?
Well, 20 aside from the fact I hope I'm around with Carolyn, I would love to be able to hear my grandkids say, boy, one of the places I may want to live is Huff. I would love for to be looking at one of the food shows on television, and folks are walking through Huff in the neighborhood with all these food places, all these restaurants, all these different restaurants, etc., and drinking coffee and just enjoying life and living in the moment of all the diversity and all of the wonderful different flavors and colors of a vibrant community. That's what I would want to see.
Thank you for your question.
Hi, my name's Shonda Ford White, and I'm of Cleveland Inner City Ballet, which is actually started in Huff at Thurgood Marshall under Councilwoman Fannie Lewis back in '98. My husband and I own a home in the Huff area, and we've been there about 16, 17 years now. And we love the community, we love the area. But I think that one of the things that's missing is that for people like my husband and myself who live in the area, who are professionals in the community, and we have young families, we see that there are churches and schools that are being closed down and taken over by larger interests and larger organizations. And it frustrates us because every morning I have to ship my children off to the suburbs to go to school. And churches that I went to when I was a child are no longer there. And instead we have a parking lot, or we have a cancer care facility for a larger hospital. I can stand on my porch and see their sign right there. And my concern is, because I was here 20 years ago in Huff as a child, or a little longer than that actually. And I was here a few years ago buying a home in Huff. And I'm wondering 20 years from now, what will be in the community for my children if they want to continue to live in Huff. It really concerns me, and it weighs heavy on me and my family that larger interests are more important than the community. And one other thing I wanted to ask about is Yeah, one other thing I'd like to ask about is predatory lending. We always reference the downfall to Huff to only the riot. There have been a lot of other things that have happened between then and now that are not recognized publicly and openly. Thank you.
Part of the 20 years we touched on. Let's go to the predatory lending first, because you mentioned banks early on in your comments.
Right. So if we're going to grow any community, you have to really partner with banks that have a vision for growing the community. You know, they will sit at the table and tell you why they can't. And here's, it's not just banks, it's also developers. Renaissance Place was not driven by developers. It was driven by buyers. We came as buyers. So we didn't have a developer come in, which I'm not putting down developers, come in and say, listen, this is what we're going to build you. We're going to build your house looks like this, and this one looks like this, and this one looks like this, and then we're going to go out and we're going to get everybody to move in. That's not what we're talking about. If you want real investment, you build your own. And you say, this is my decision, I'm making a move. So it's going to take a population move for true reinvestment, right? Now, to me, what made Renaissance different was we went as a group of 20 people to one bank and 20 families. And we said, look, this is how much money you're going to make if you finance us in mortgages where you're going to get paid back. If the banks are doing their traditional way of lending, it may not work for reinvestment. I don't think you could do that today, but you couldn't do that then because 3 banks turned us down. They said, no, we can't do that. First of all, we sell our mortgages. Number one, we got to make money on the market. We package them and we sell them. And we said, we don't want a bank that's going to sell our mortgages. Why? Because at that time, when they were selling mortgages, this was in the 90s, you would have a bank that you would, let's say, Joe Blow Bank, you'd sign up with them on your mortgage, and a week later, you get a letter from somebody else. And that other person is telling you, oh, we now have your mortgage. And you're paying them, and you thought you were talking to the nice guy that was, wearing the suit, and that's who you were going to see. And you didn't see your lender anymore. Okay. That is a disconnect.
Let me catch you short here. We're running out of time. The larger part of her question, though, Freddie, had to do with the idea of entities taking over. Does the city have zoning in place or anything that would protect it from being lost as a neighborhood?
So you're going to need more than zoning to protect the neighborhood from being lost. That's one aspect of it. But I will say this. I think in Cleveland, particularly, and this goes back to leadership in a place, that takes leadership to ensure that that does not occur. And I think that with the institutions that exist, the relationship between the community and the institutions, in my mind, has to be a reciprocal one. That means co-beneficiary. From my vantage point, what I'm seeing now is that dialogue occurring and that intimacy happening. And before, there was a really hard line drawn that, hey, they're the devil, they ain't coming up in here. And that was the mindset. And there are institutions who may not have the community's interests at heart. And that is where I think the city and the community step up and are at the table. And there's a lot of opportunities for them to be at the table. So when you think about the institutions that the young lady was referring to, whether you're talking about the Cleveland Clinic, whether you're talking about university hospitals, whether you're talking about Case Western Reserve, these institutions are mainstays in our city and are really going to be an important part of our renaissance. But again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. How does the transaction play out? Okay. So you have stewards at the table, Mansfield being one of them. Vicki Johnson is here, she's one of them. Myself is one of them. I see Brian Smith from the Cleveland Clinic. These people are in each other's midst, in each other's face. And as long as the dialogue is happening, then we can safeguard against any one self-interest dominating the other, okay?
We'll have to leave it there. We could do this another hour. Thank you so much. Freddie Collier, Carolyn Watts-Allen, Barry Withers. Thank you all so much. Dan Moulthrop.
Thank you very much, Rick. Wonderful job. Today at the City Club, we're enjoying a forum on the past, present, and future of Huff. Thank you for the question that finally got us to 20 years hence. Today's forum is the George S. Dively Memorial Forum on Cleveland's Tomorrow, made possible by a generous grant from the George Dively Foundation. We appreciate their continued support of the City Club. Today's sponsor is the Unger Family Foundation, and our community partner is the Cleveland State University Maxine Goodman Levin College of Urban Affairs. We thank you both for your partnership today. We welcome guests at tables hosted by Cleveland Clinic, the Cleveland Orchestra, Famicos Foundation, the Jack Joseph and Morton Mandel Humanities Center as well. And lastly, we welcome students from Citizens Leadership Academy and St. Martin de Porres High School. Student participation in City Club forums is made possible by a grant from the Loeb Foundation. We thank you for being here. Lastly, I want to remind you again, save the date for October 7th, a bus tour of Huff, ending with Mansfield Fraser in some fashion, I don't know. Thank you, panelists. Thank you very much, Rick. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your participation today. Our forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org. Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.